Hey folks, and welcome to CarStarz' 10 Wild Facts about the United States Air Force's Landmaster in the 1977 film Damnation Alley. Fact number 1. Despite some composite shots for the film making it appear that there were two Landmasters used in the film, there was only a single, in full-scale form anyway, Landmaster built. Production wanted a machine that looked like it could plow through the broken remains of a post-apocalyptic world and keep going where ordinary vehicles could not. Dean Jeffries was the man trusted to turn that idea into a reality. Jeffries actually based the Landmaster on the patented Tristar all-terrain concept created by Robert and John Forsyth of Vehicle Development Corporation, a design built around giant wheel clusters that already looked half military experiment and half science fiction prophecy. On film, it feels like something dreamed up by a comic book artist with a welding torch, but its roots were grounded in a real patented off-road vehicle concept that Jeffries then transformed into one of the most unforgettable machines of 70s cinema. Jeffries was already famous for building extraordinary custom vehicles for film and television. He once described the Landmaster as the biggest challenge of his career at that point. His shop spent nearly 3 months bringing it to life, and the project was said to have cost somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000, an enormous sum for a single custom-built movie vehicle at the time. That hefty price tag helps explain why the production did not build up a fleet of these monsters, as well as had to use miniatures, which we'll get more into the details of those a bit later on, and additional special effects work helping create the illusion of multiple Landmasters on screen. The Landmaster was every bit as massive as the movie makes it seem. This behemoth measured 35 feet long and 11 feet tall, weighing around 11 tons. Those numbers alone give you an idea of just how colossal this machine was. Jeffries successfully built something perfectly crafted for the role with the visual presence of a futuristic armored transport, and that size became a huge part of its personality. Even standing still, the Landmaster has a surreal presence and unmistakably looking like it could roll over the end of civilization and barely feel it. Fact number 2. What powers this beast, you ask? Maybe some kind of big diesel power plant? Well, no, the Landmaster's power actually came from a 391 Ford Industrial V8, which is rated at 192 net horsepower and 333 pound-feet of torque. But of course this machine wasn't built to win any drag races. It was built to feel tough, deliberate, and terrain dominating, like something that could claw its way through the wreckage of a dead world without complaint. There is something oddly humbling about a vehicle this outrageous being powered by such a common engine instead of some flashy fantasy setup. It makes the whole creation feel more grounded, so under all that science fiction realm bodywork was just a lumbering V8 pushing it along. The 391 was paired up with an Allison automatic, and that heavy-duty transmission choice tells you a lot about the vehicle's personality before it even turned any of its many wheels. This was not some hopped-up hot rod trying to feel quick and sharp. It was a giant rolling fortress meant to cruise calm and steady over rough lands unstoppably. The Allison managed the torque well without drama, providing motion without fuss, and the kind of operation built to handle the mass smoothly. As per Dean Jeffries, the Landmaster tops out at about 55 miles per hour, which doesn't sound very fast until you picture that enormous rig charging along at real road speed over any terrain you can throw at it. 55 in the Landmaster feels like a mobile bunker deciding it has somewhere else it needs to be. That is what makes the Ford V8 and Allison combination so satisfying. Together they gave this giant movie creation enough real-world credibility to feel like more than a prop. It did not need wild numbers to be impressive. It only needed enough honest grunt to move a towering apocalypse vehicle with authority. Fact number 3. The Landmaster wasn't built upon any pre-existing chassis, nor did Dean Jeffries build it around anything conventional, because nothing about this machine was ordinary. Its body was constructed with a mix of steel and aluminum, with steel plating helping to give it that brutal armored plated-like aesthetic on screen. The chassis itself was arranged around an articulated center section, so instead of turning like a normal vehicle, the whole vehicle just flexed in the middle in order to change direction. That alone gave it a completely different method of steering from any truck or bus the audience had ever seen. It looked less like any known road vehicle and more like a piece of heavy equipment from some future wastelands or possibly the moon. The Landmaster's suspension layout was one of the strangest parts of the whole creation because its suspension setup was unlike anything on a normal truck. The Landmaster did not depend on a traditional spring arrangement to soak up punishment. A huge part of its toughness came from the articulated center section where the front and rear halves could flex in relation to each other through hydraulic action, while the gap itself was enclosed by a neoprene sleeve. That gave the vehicle its strange crawling-like movement and helped it deal with rough ground in a way that looked more like heavy machinery than highway transport. Instead of jolting and pitching with the familiar rhythm of leaf springs or coils, the Landmaster absorbed terrain through sheer structure and controlled flex. That brute design was no weak gimmick either, because the vehicle was reported to be able to survive a 25-foot drop test without damage. What we saw inside the cabin on screen, however, was just a clever-built illusion. The real vehicle's interior was surprisingly plain Jane, a very basic functional space with driver seating only, not the rolling survival headquarters that the film tries to pass it off as. The detailed command center look was created with a separate studio interior set, which is where the production put all the memorable living and control room elements, including the banks of equipment, the more spacious cabin layout, and the built-in shelter features that sold the idea of a self-contained apocalypse battling machine. Outside, Jeffries gave the movie a hulking practical monster that truly existed. Inside, the studio created the fantasy of comfort, technology, and livability that the real machine never actually possessed. Fact number 4. The Landmaster looked war-ready, and the weapon layout was a huge part of its attitude. Its screen hardware included twin-roof rocket launchers, front-mounted flamethrowers, retractable front bazookas, and multiple side-mounted machine guns that gave it the appropriate look of a rolling fortress. One of the more interesting details is that the machine guns were reportedly functional when the vehicle was initially constructed, which makes the Landmaster even more outrageous as a real build. By the time it was actually used for the film, though, those guns had been reduced to non-functional props. The production did not intend on including any machine gun firing scenes with the vehicle, or any flamethrower scenes for those props either, for that matter, so the aggressive armament remained more part of its visual identity than its actual on-screen portrayal. The Landmaster wasn't strictly a land beast, though. It had genuine amphibious ability, to a certain degree anyway. The vehicle could technically float and move itself through water, using its unusual wheel system to paddle along, and its doors and lower body were sealed so it could take to the water without instantly becoming a sinker. That does not mean it was some effortless speedboat in disguise, however. Its water travel capability was quite limited, and as Jeffries later recalled that the practical full-scale part of the Flathead Lake sequence we see here was one of the most difficult parts of the entire shoot. On calm water, the Landmaster could sell the illusion decently, but once conditions turned harsh or any kind of precision stunt work on water was required, the production had to lean on miniature work instead of attempting them with the full-size vehicle, which just wasn't feasible. That is where the meticulously detailed stand-in scale models came in very handy, and they were far more important than many viewers realize. As per Jeffries, there were 3 miniatures built for different scenes, including some of the floating shots, and those miniature Landmasters took over when the movie needed rougher water, harsher wave action, and the dramatic rollover chaos of the storm material. That is a great little piece of movie magic, because the full-size machine sells the weight in reality, while the scale models let the filmmakers punish the Landmaster in ways that would have been crazy dangerous to attempt with the actual 11-ton and very expensive full-scale Landmaster. That blend is a big reason the vehicle still feels so memorable. Fact number 5. What made the Landmaster so incredibly capable was the very unique and unprecedented Tristar drivetrain. It used 3 independent drive sources and a layout built around heavy-duty commercial hardware, which gave a genuinely industrial strength driveline instead of movie prop fakery in this department. Each triangular wheel cluster was gear-driven, and all 12 wheels could be powered whenever the system needed them. Of course, only 8 tires were ever actually in contact with a solid surface, because each Tristar assembly carried 2 wheels down and 1 up, which is why the Landmaster is often described as an 8x8 vehicle even though it carries 12 active wheels. It was a 12-wheel machine with an 8-wheel footprint, essentially, which sounds contradictory until you realize the whole vehicle was engineered around swift movement over any brutal terrain it encounters, and those seemingly extra wheels are not just there for show. The Tristar wheel system was the Landmaster's signature trick, and it was an extraordinary one. When it met a rock, hole, or other blockage, at speed the upper wheel in the Tristar cluster snapped down into position to maintain traction and shove the vehicle over it and onward instead of letting it hang up like an ordinary truck would. That is what gave it that eerie climbing motion that still looks strange and unbelievable decades later. As per Jeffries, the Tristar design even allowed the Landmaster to drive over obstacles as high as 6 feet, which helps explain why the vehicle never looked like it was merely driving across rough ground. It seemed to step over it. Although since the production was disallowed to even touch those many boulders when they were filming on location around the Grand Canyon in Arizona, we didn't get to see that fully demonstrated in the film, unfortunately. Additionally, the Tristar drive system was arranged so the vehicle could even keep operating if either the front or rear trinary unit went out of action, which makes the whole thing feel even more like an actual armored survival machine than a studio-built fantasy. As for those large aggressive tires, Jeffries fitted the Landmaster with Goodyear's Super Terra Grip tires in 38 by 20 by 16.1 size, and they look exactly like what a machine this strange would need to maintain traction on any and all terrains. These were not sleek highway tires or some generic rubber grabbed at the last minute. They were wide, heavy agricultural grade with the right footprint and the right visual bulk to support a giant articulated crawler that looked ready to tackle mud, rubble, and broken ground. They gave the Landmaster a planted, purposeful stance and appeal that any smaller or less numerous tires, for that matter, would not have pulled off. Fact number 6. With all that aggressive driving of such a hefty, complex vehicle on such harsh and unforgiving surfaces, and no backup Landmaster to switch to in case of trouble, one would assume that surely something must have broken down or got damaged during the shoot. Well, what makes the Landmaster even more amazing is how little drama there was in real life compared with the punishment it took for the camera. This giant machine spent its production time clawing across ugly ground, threading around huge rocks, and charging through harsh locations that would have rattled any average vehicle into pieces. The whole point of the build was to look indestructible, and Jeffries' creation backed that up in a very real way and beyond expectation. For something so massive, so unusual, and so loaded with custom engineering, it surprisingly did not turn into a disintegrating fragile nightmare once filming began. That alone says a lot about the quality of the build. The Landmaster was asked to behave like an end-of-the-world brute, and by all available accounts it kept showing up, fully intact and ready to work. In fact, the only real trouble the Landmaster suffered during the shoot was a flat tire on one-wheel arrangement. Not a shattered joint, not a drowned drivetrain, not a ripped-apart body shell, just one tire. That detail gives the Landmaster a strange kind of dignity. On screen, the vehicle lives in a world of killer insects, violent storms, and collapsing civilization, but behind the scenes it sounds almost stubbornly dependable. Fact number 7. The Landmaster's standout uniqueness, remarkable capabilities, massive stature, and futuristic apocalyptic appeal meant that it couldn't just instantly fade away from the spotlight after starring in Damnation Alley. The Landmaster was featured in a number of other productions after its primary role. First in the 1984 Amoco Road Warrior commercial, then in 1989's TV show Highway to Heaven, in an episode called Merry Christmas from Grandpa, also in 1989, the film The Wizard of Speed and Time, later in the 1994 film entitled Apex, and in the 1994 Dino Island pre-ride film at the Sony Movie Glide Theater, and also in the 1997 film Hybrid. That is an interestingly lengthy and a bit weird resume for one giant custom-built movie vehicle, originally intended for just a single production. It sold gasoline, wandered through television fantasy, slipped into cult science fiction, and even ended up in attraction footage. The Landmaster kept drifting back into view whenever a production needed something that looked too bizarre to be mistaken for anything else. Then there's its other well-known appearance in Quiet Riot's 1986 The Wild and the Young music video, which may be the most wild matchup the Landmaster ever found outside its original film. The video belongs to the exact kind of oversized, theatrical 80s rock and roll culture where a machine like this feels instantly at home in the heavy metal chaos. It does not need exposition or any clever setup. It just has to appear briefly, and the visual temperature of the whole performance jumps. The vehicle happened to drop into a 1986 music video at the exact moment when something this aggressive, strange, and larger-than-life presence felt at home on MTV. However, the Landmaster's most substantial role outside Damnation Alley was in the short-lived TV show Get a Life, in an episode entitled Paperboy 2000, which aired in 1990. That appearance is particularly peculiar because it took a machine originally built to survive an apocalyptic world and dropped it into a deadpan comedy premise about a monstrous paperboy delivery replacement vehicle. The Landmaster did not need much help to sell the joke. Its sheer size and absurd silhouette already did most of the work the moment it appeared. What makes that reuse even better is the production link back to the original build, because Dean Jeffries was credited as the designer of the Paperboy 2000 vehicle. That gives the whole thing a satisfying continuity, like the same outrageous machine got recast in a totally different genre and somehow still fit. Fact number 8. When it wasn't being used, as well as after its stardom days, the Landmaster settled into a second life that was almost as memorable as its Hollywood career. It spent most of its early inactive days sitting outside Dean Jeffries' shop on Cahuenga Boulevard in North Hollywood, becoming one of those impossible roadside sights local car people never forgot. Instead of being hidden away in a warehouse, this giant apocalypse machine basically became part of the scenery there, parked in public view year after year like a mechanical monument to 70s movie excess. That long outdoor stay gave it a strange kind of fame all its own. It was no longer just a prop from Damnation Alley alone. It became a landmark, the sort of thing people would drive past, stare at, and probably wonder how something like that had ended up casually sitting beside an ordinary custom shop for decades. Then, in 2005, the Landmaster was sold to a private California owner and restored into presentable condition, then pushed onto the show car circuit, including an appearance at the 2007 San Francisco Rod and Custom Show. That revival did not persist for long, however. Later reports say it was vandalized while in storage, then moved again, and by 2015 it had landed at Gene Winfield's shop near Mojave. That placement felt strangely fitting, though. One legendary customizer's monstrous science fiction creation ended up sitting at another legendary movie car builder's place with a suitable desert backdrop, not all that different looking than some prior filming locations, not to mention also visible enough from the road to become its own roadside attraction all over again. By then, the Landmaster had gone from movie vehicle to neighborhood oddity to showpiece to wounded survivor, and then to desert shop relic with a long history behind it. So, is the Landmaster still around today, you ask? Well, the latest public trail says it was resold again in 2024 to another private California collector, and the most recent reports add that it was undergoing an extensive restoration back toward filming condition as of 2025. I did not find a newer public source than that confirming a more exact city or finished destination as of 2026. So, the Landmaster never really slipped quietly into oblivion like so many other former movie star vehicles. After all the years camping out in front of famous shops, all the weather, all the moves, and all the neglect, it apparently survived long enough to be taken seriously once again as a machine worth saving properly, and hopefully kept that way thereafter. Fact number 9. And for those of you wondering what happened to those scale model miniature Landmasters, well, of the 3 mini Landmasters reportedly built for Damnation Alley, there was this one lone survivor, and it is a quite sizable one. This model in particular measures 36 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 17 inches tall, giving it real presence even off camera. It was built from fiberglass, resin, metal, wood, and plastic, then finished in silver paint to mirror the look of the full-size machine. One of the coolest details is that even the scale model kept a flexible center section so it could articulate like the full-scale Landmaster. That alone tells you the builders were trying to preserve the machine's weird physical character thoroughly even at reduced scale, which makes the miniature feel like a serious filmmaking tool rather than some cheap stand-in display piece. The surviving model also carries the kind of production details that make old effects hardware so fascinating. Its roof launcher assembly was still present, and the write-up details that electronics wiring was present inside, which strongly suggests it was built to do more than sit under studio lights for beauty shots. It sounds like a working effects miniature designed to move, light up, or interact in some way during filming. Those meticulously built scale models were built to fill in for those more intense scenes like the dust storm rollover, the rough water footage, or any other violent action shot where the full-size Landmaster would have been too risky to throw around for the shot, and they did the job quite well. The miniature's latest resale really drives home just how much affection the Landmaster still inspires in modern times. It sold on juliansauctions.com on December 14th, 2023 for a whopping $13,000, which is a very impressive result when you consider its estimated value at the time was only $1,000 to $2,000. Fact number 10. Looking into the retail scale model world, although there were never any official or otherwise mass production releases of the Landmaster in scale model form, that unfortunately meaning that although there are no die-cast or even any mainstream plastic models in any scale available to purchase, there are at least a couple different ways you could go here to get yourself a scale model of the Landmaster. The cheapest path to take, if you have the skill and a machine for it, would be 3D printing your own Landmaster model with some of the 3D models available online, like this fine example here on cgtrader.com that you could download, print, and detail up to a nice replica. If you don't have a 3D printer, there have been a few resin model kits made of the Landmaster over the years, but those are few and far between these days and are now very rare and very expensive when you do find them. However, you can purchase already 3D printed Landmasters in various scales on eBay. That'll cost you around $150 or so, but it's still about half the cost or less than those rare resin model kits, so it's worth it in this case. By the way, folks, I have another film-related and in similar format YouTube channel called Mind Litter. If anyone is interested in hearing more about our favorite movies and TV shows beyond just the cars, such as other behind-the-scenes info, filming locations, and actor-related tidbits and such, I will put a link in the description below for those interested in checking it out. Well, there you have it, folks. Thanks for watching, and make sure to hit that subscribe button if you like what you saw here. You guys are all great. See you next time.